as a reminder, right afterwards, you're all invited for tea and snacks in the MPH, in the gymnasium, in the multipurpose hall. So don't go anywhere. Stay around, inshallah. And hopefully you'll have questions and we'll have answers. More likely they'll have the answers and I'll be just as confounded as you. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Inshallah, the slides will show up at some point in time on one of the screens here, inshallah. All right, so Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa salatu wa salam ala ashraf al-anbiya wa mursaleen, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man tabuhum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin wa ba'd. So we are going to be discussing the history of Islam in America, and I'm going to try and present in the next 10 minutes tops a very quick overview of the last 500 years, you heard that right, 500 years of Islamic history in America. So it's the unbroken thread, 500 years of Islam in America. From the sands of Galveston, you heard that right, Galveston, to the Medina of America. So pre-Columbian era, so even before Columbus, there are some scholars who have claimed a history of Islam in the Americas. You have the Mandinkan expeditions, Mansa Abu Bakr II, 2,000 ships that crossed the Atlantic to discover the limits of the ocean, many of them never returning. Never returning. So this was 500 years before Columbus that this took place. And one of our great scholars of Islamic history in the West, Abdullah Hakim Quick, may Allah preserve him, was one of the first to write about this extensively, and the trips of Mansa Musa and the efforts that he made in exploring the world. Also, you have scholars, non-Muslim scholars I might add, by the way, like Dr. Barry Fell, who have found evidence they believe of Islamic presence in the Americas from the time of the Companions or right after, based on inscriptions and other things they find in the Southwest and in the Central American areas, etc. So potentially history that predates Columbus by hundreds of years. These are some of the theories that are out there, not widely accepted. So these are theories out there that predate even Columbus. Now, after that being said, what is established, and this is where the 500 years comes from, is in 1528. 1528. So just about 500 years ago, the first recorded verified Muslim in the US by the name of Mustafa Azemmouri, Estevanico, he changed his name, Estevanico, who was an enslaved Moroccan, who was an enslaved Moroccan that was shipwrecked on Galveston Island. So we all know where Galveston is, yeah? That's where all the cruise ships leave from, south of Houston. So he was shipwrecked on Galveston Island, Texas. So this puts a whole other spin on Abbott and Paxton and what they're trying to do, claiming Islam is foreign to America. Islam predates all of their families, my family, who arrived here in the 1600s, by over 100 years. Muslims were here long before the English, long before the Dutch, long before all of these people. This is the truth. These are the facts that no one disputes. They like to pretend that it doesn't exist, but it exists. So, shipwrecked on Galveston Island, he was a survivor that traversed Texas for 8 years as a translator and a healer. And then he has a legacy of being the first African and Muslim to enter the American West. Now again, we spoke about Abdullah Hakim Quick and Barry Fell. There are theories of Muslims in the Americas that predate even that by hundreds of years. But the established fact is that 500 years ago, even in Texas, Muslims were already here, before the Americas were even an idea. So Estevanico was assuredly the first African to traverse Texas. This is in the Handbook of Texas. Again, one of these things they don't want to talk about, but it exists, even in their own books. So literacy as resistance, many of the Muslims in the Americas, the demographics, 15 to 30% of the enslaved Africans that came to the US were Muslims. Actually, Abdullah Hakim Quick would put that number even higher at 33 to almost 40%. So some of the notables, Omar ibn Saeed from 1770 to 1864 authored an autobiography, and Surah Mulk in Arabic while enslaved in the Carolinas. They would write in Arabic to preserve their heritage. And you have Bilali Muhammad, Sapelo Island in Georgia, authored the Risala, a 13-page text on Islamic law, similar to probably from the Shafi background, etc. So they were forbidden to read English, so they preserved their faith by writing it in Arabic because the masters couldn't understand what they were doing. And there's some examples. I read something in the course of doing this. There's one area where a master was so impressed by what the Muslims were doing that he actually allowed them to establish a prayer hall. So ostensibly, there's a masjid that predates even the Mother Mosque in Iowa by hundreds of years, that the slaves and enslaved Africans, Muslims, had established with the permission of their master on his plantation. So these are the history facts, the details that many people don't want to talk about. So the U.S. Camel Corps in the Wild West. This is another one that we probably have never heard of. In 1856, U.S. Army imports camels to Indianola, Texas, for Southwest transport. Hajj Ali, this is how they used to change their names and make them more appealing, accessible to the Westerners. Hajj Ali, an Ottoman subject of Greek and Syrian heritage, was hired as a cameler to lead the camels. And he was a living link, a Muslim pioneer who became a legend of the American West, buried in Quartzsite, Arizona. And his legacy maintained the prayers and fasting, so he was actively Muslim, wasn't hiding, actively Muslim up until his death in 1902. So the 20th century, there was a legend of the American Southwest who was Muslim, practicing his faith openly. Here's one that some of you may or may not have heard of. One of the first established converts in the West, white man, Russell Webb, Alexander Russell Webb. He was a diplomat, U.S. consul to the Philippines who converted in 1888. He was at the 1893 World's Parliament of Religions in Chicago representing Islam and defending the faith against misconceptions. So dawah was being done by converts in the Americas in the 19th century. So we're just continuing their legacy. And he created infrastructure by establishing the Muslim World Journal and the first American Islamic press. In the 20th century, you have a new awakening, where you have in 1913 the Moorish Science Temple, and in 1930 the Nation of Islam, so reclaiming a heritage that had been lost for many, for the African Americans, where Islam was a return to a stolen identity and not a new conversion. They were simply returning, as we often say, you were born upon a fitrah. They were rediscovering the fitrah that they weren't just born upon, they were born in and had been stolen away from them. And the self-determination that allowed these movements to help them restore their dignity, discipline, and their economic independence. That was one of the things that, regardless of some of his theological issues, Elijah Muhammad was very good at building economic independence and strength within his communities. So he did a lot of good in spite of some of the other things. And then preparing the soil for the return to a Sunni orthodoxy. So that Sunni orthodoxy, and this is something that our brothers will be able to talk to, was a bridge, and that was the Dar al-Islam movement. Many of you have probably never even heard of that movement. So this had its origins in Brooklyn when it broke away from the State Street Mosque, which still exists in New York till today, the State Street Mosque. Its identity was explicitly Sunni and Orthodox from its very inception, making itself very distinct from the Nation of Islam. And its mission was a grassroots community building prior to ministry and strict adherence to the Quran and Sunnah. So they were very definitively Sunni. They were in turbans and thobes in the middle of Brooklyn. And that was the identity, and it was well known. And so it was a grassroots, and it had a legacy. The Dar, as it's called, paved the road for American Sunni Islam before the major immigrant waves in the 60s. And as I know at least Muhammad Abdullah, I'm not sure about Abdul Jami, and even myself, my first two imams I had after I converted in 1993 were part of the Dar. And so I'm kind of a grandson of the Dar. Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah here is very much so attached to the Dar from his childhood. He was born into Islam. His parents were the converts that raised him in the Dar. And Muhammad Abdul Jami, he'll share his story, some of his story in his context with you as well. So this was the legacy that is oftentimes not even known by many, even within the larger community. Then you have 1975, this is where the legacy of Elijah Muhammad was continued by his son, Warathuddin Muhammad. And in 1975, Warathuddin Muhammad led the Nation of Islam towards mainstream Sunni orthodoxy. It was an official, if you will, a conversion to Sunni Islam in 1975. And so it shifted away from a race-based theology and realigned it with the millions of the global ummah in that time in 1975. And it was the largest mass conversion to Islam in US history. So we are not a new people, we are the same people, but we have been guided to a clearer light. Assuming that was one of his quotes about the change, the conversion that they were going through, going from Nation of Islam to Orthodox Sunni Islam. And then here in Dallas itself, deep in the heart of Dallas, Temple 48, which became Masjid al-Islam. And our dear brothers here, both Muhammad Abdul-Jami and Muhammad Abdullah, both have a deep relationship with Masjid al-Islam. As you see here, it predates all of the masajid in Dallas-Fort Worth by decades, having been established in the 50s originally as Temple 48 on Flora Avenue in downtown Dallas. It fostered self-reliance. Pioneers sold fish and bean pies. That reminds me of my own conversion story. Save that for another time. To fund the first institutions during Jim Crow. So you have to understand what that means. In the middle of segregation and oppression based on race, they were fighting for their identity as Muslims and doing their best to raise themselves up, as we would say, pull themselves up by their bootstraps in the middle of the inner city. So in 1975, it became Masjid al-Islam from Temple 48 to Masjid al-Islam, the first and oldest mosque in the Dallas area, predating IANT and Frisco and Denton by decades. And so its role as the mother mosque of the region and a beacon of social justice in South Dallas, which these brothers can tell you all about. The second wave was the immigrant wave, which opened the doors in 1965 because of the act that abolished quotas on immigration, inviting professionals from South Asia and the Middle East to come into the United States. This is where you see the MSAs in particular and other institutions being established. Coming from Minnesota, I can tell you the earliest institutions in Minnesota were the MSAs on campus, where they established a masjid that still runs until today in Minneapolis in a house right on campus. And it still operates as a masjid until today. So 60 plus years as a masjid in Minneapolis, still operating. That was the institution, that was what this brought about, all of those students that came into the country. You had the institution building. The International Muslims founded the Islamic Association in North Texas, here in Dallas in 1969. And then growth, it brought scholars, resources, and a reconnection with the larger Muslim world. Then you have the confluence. This is where it gets local. You had Masjid al-Islam having made the transition with Warathdin to Sunni Islam, and the growing local community merged together for the first Eid, a joint Eid amongst the communities in 1977. You had Temple 48, Masjid al-Islam, and Immigrant Wave, so it was a joint Eid al-Fitr held between Masjid al-Islam and IANT back in 77. It cemented the unified religious identity of the Ummah here in Dallas-Fort Worth, and the lesson was that the indigenous and the immigrant should and can become one body. That's something that Sheikh Mohammed here is working on diligently with a project called the Twin Mosque Project between Mass Dallas and Masjid al-Islam. The Medina of America, if you haven't heard that term before, that refers to where we are right now. We are the Medina of America, our so-called Medina of America. The ecosystem in DFW is home to, and I'm sure this number is too small, 60 plus masajid. It's probably the large ones. We know there's a lot of smaller ones. Mosques, seminaries, and civic organizations, collaboration between historic partnerships between urban centers like Al-Islam and other mega mosques. I mentioned the Twin Mosque Project, which is a project of the USCMO, the umbrella organization for Muslims nationwide, to build relationships between inner city masjids and the larger suburban masjids to foster an exchange of this legacy so that we learn from one another. As Allah said in the Quran, لِتَعَارَفُوا, in order that we get to know one another. And so this service and the service legacy of Al-Islam and the inner city masjids is huge. And their Day of Dignity is a flagship project that has been going on for many years and is an ongoing opportunity to give back to the poor in society and become a means of their opening their eyes up to Islam, inshallah. So one body, one history. Indigenous, enslaved, Dar al-Islam, the flourishing fruit of DFW Islam exists because the indigenous roots held the soil. We are not two rivers anymore, we are one ocean. And from there, I'm going to turn it over to the experts so they can share their insights and their experiences and details that I probably left out, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. جزاك الله خيرا to ICI, Islamic Center of Irving, to the community, to my esteemed and honored panel members, Imam Abdul-Jami, Imam Saeed Purcell, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to bless and reward you all. Ameen. Brothers and sisters, I want you to understand a key concept in Islam, and that is jihad, to struggle for the sake of Allah. You see, Muslims in America have always had to struggle. From the signs of the first Muslims who were brought from the shores of West Africa, to the Muslims of the 1970s, to the Muslims of 2026, it's always been about sacrifice and struggle. When the Muslim becomes too comfortable with the luxuries of society, with the comforts of the life of this world, and divorces themselves from struggle and sacrifice, then we start to lose our deen. Islam came here through struggle. As Imam Saeed referred to the first Muslims who arrived here in the 15, 16, 1700s on slave ships. And there's some history and proof, some evidence that Muslims were here even before that. But I'll start there because we have undeniable evidence that, according to our brother Abdullah Hakim Quick, he says that 30% of Muslims, of people, of enslaved human beings that were brought from West Africa were Muslim, 30%. And they were Muslim, there were millions of enslaved people brought from West Africa, from Guinea, from Mali, from Senegal, from Nigeria, from Sierra Leone, from Ghana. In Ghana, they have a place called the Door of No Return. You can see this in Ghana, where they would house enslaved human beings and then put them on this ship for them to never come back. 30% of those millions who were shipped, roughly, hundreds of thousands up to 1 million, were Muslim who were brought here on slave ships. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the movie Roots or read the book. Ever read the book Roots? Seen the movie Roots? Anybody? You need to see this or read the book. It's better. Read the book. There's a character in Roots who is named Kunta Kinte. His name is Kunta Kinte. Huh? He's a character in this movie. But he's not only fictional, this is a real human being as well. He was brought from the Mandinka tribes in West Africa. He was a Muslim. He was a Muslim. And in the movie, they beat him and whip him. And they try to make his name, they try to change his name to what? Does anybody know? Toby. They whip him. They say, your name is Toby. Your name is Toby. And they continue to whoop him every time. Your name is Toby. You see, the plan of people in power, the corrupt of power, is to disassociate people from their identity. That's why the core concept of the Nation of Islam was know thyself. We're not talking about the aqidah. We'll leave that for later. I'll let Imam Abdul Jami talk about that.
No burden, no trouble there.
But the core concept is know thyself. The plan for the enemy has always been to divide and conquer. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Hold on to the rope of Allah all together and be not divided. Because when we're divided, we're weaker. And that was the plan of the enemy the whole time. When they brought us from Africa, we weren't Christians. There were no Christians. There was 30% Muslim and 70% indigenous African religions. And those Muslims, those early Muslims who Imam Saeed touched on, people like Kunta Kinte, people like Bilali Muhammad, who wrote, it was Maliki fiqh, by the way. West Africa still to this day is mostly majority Maliki. He wrote his fiqh book in Maliki madhab, in Arabic, about tahara, purification, how to make wudu. I want you to understand the severity of this. Imagine being enslaved. Not just any slavery. This is chattel transatlantic slave trade, where the most heinous of procedures were taking place. Babies ripped away from their mothers. Men being forced to impregnate women. Yes, they were breeding human beings. Beatings, hangings, lynchings, separating and dividing people from their origins. And what was the main strategy? It was to make people adopt this culture. Let me explain a little bit more. My father used to tell me there's two types of Muslims. Both of them are immigrants. One who immigrated by choice and the other one who immigrated by force. By choice and by force. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّةِ, that every action is judged by what? Its intention. Some scholars say this hadith comprises 1/3 of all Islamic knowledge. Every action is by its intention. وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى. and everyone shall have that which they intended. But that's only half of the hadith. What about the other half? فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. Whoever's migration was for Allah and His Messenger, his migration was for Allah and His Messenger. وَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ لِدُنْيَا يُصِيبُهَا أَوْ إِمْرَأَةٍ يَنْكِحُهَا فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى مَا هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِ. Whoever's migration was to take a piece of this dunya or to take some woman's hand in marriage, everyone shall be rewarded for that which they migrated. The Prophet was talking about a real life example of somebody named Qais, Muhajir Qais. There was a man who made migration to take a woman's hand in marriage from Mecca to Medina. His purpose of migrating was to take this woman's hand in marriage. You see, Islam in America has always been established by sacrifice and struggle. If you came here just for the dunya, Allah is going to give you the dunya. You're going to have it. But you won't have any share of the hereafter. But if you came here really to establish the deen of Allah and to struggle and to sacrifice to continue the legacy of Islam in America, then you'll have the dunya and the hereafter. You have to ask yourself, why did you migrate to this country? And why do you remain here? Because those early Muslims on those slave ships, they were praying on the bottom of these ships as they were shackled. They were finding ways to hold on and preserve their language. They didn't want to give up their names. They didn't want to give up their religion. But we live in the lap of luxury where we can come to the masjid any day and we have no idea about the struggle and the sacrifice, the price that they paid. Bilal Muhammad, he has this document which is preserved in the University of Georgia. Sapelo Island is where he was, and his document is preserved in the University of Georgia. His fiqh document. You can see it, you can research it, you can look it up, you can go there and witness it in person. Also, Ibn Saeed also has writings in Arabic. People preserving their deen. You know, Thomas Jefferson, who is one of the forefathers of this country, he himself had a Quran. Do you know that the first country to accept the United States of America as a sovereign nation was Morocco? Was a Muslim country. They had an iftar in the White House. Do you know that Thomas Jefferson, who is one of the authors of the Constitution, the First Amendment, which gives us our rights to practice religious freedom in America, there was a document that preceded that, which was the Virginia Statute between him and James Madison. Thomas Jefferson, I'm teaching you American history here, and how it intercepts with Islamic history. The First Amendment gives us the right to practice religion in America. You know where that came from? The Quran. La ikraha fi din. There's no compulsion in religion. He used the principles of the Quran to put into the Constitution of the United States of America. He had an iftar in the White House when he invited the nobles from Morocco to come here. They had an iftar in the White House. He has a Quran. And there's a Quran in the White House till today, which traces back to Thomas Jefferson. This is the history of Islam in America, a history of struggle, a history of sacrifice. And as soon as we divorce ourselves from the sacrifice which is required of us, especially in the United States of America, that's when we lose our deen. I gave you the stat in the Jum'ah earlier. For those who weren't here, I'm going to say it again. According to PewResearch.org, 23% of Muslims born in America, by the time they become adults, they no longer associate with Islam. 23%, nearly 1/4 of Muslims. You have to ask yourself, why did you come to America? Why did you come to America? Was it just for the dunya? That's it? You'll have the dunya. But you might lose your akhirah in the process. You have to continue to struggle and to sacrifice and to fight for the deen in America. Every single one of us has to be a full-time da'i. We have to be, there's no other option. Why? Because we live in a land of fasad. And our participation in this country contributes to the struggles of Muslims abroad. Yes, you pay taxes, right? Anybody doesn't pay taxes? Don't raise your hand now, you know cameras are everywhere. Everybody pays taxes. And your taxes contribute to the demise of Muslims all across the world. So you have an obligation, because your participation in this country contributes to bad. So you're a byproduct. You're guilty by association. And so therefore you have to try to change the way your participation affects other Muslims. And that was the case for the Muslims who came before us. We're standing on the shoulders of giants. But we ourselves have to unite with the struggle. We have to remember the brothers and sisters who came before us who sacrificed so much to maintain this deen in this land. Through struggle, through blood, through tears. And inshallah, Imam Abdul Jami will continue with the struggle of the resurrection of the deen of Islam here in the 1920s and 30s, inshallah. Jazakumullahu khairun. Barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Rabbi shrih li sadri. Wa yassir li amri wa hlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Ameen ya Arhamar Rahimin. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Thank you all for having this program. Yes, I'm the Imam at Masjid al-Islam. I am the proud son of two converts to Islam. My father, Rashid Abdul Jami, may Allah have mercy on his soul. He converted to Islam in 1972 at 24 years old in Washington, D.C., on the East Coast. Not part of the Dar, he was part of the Islamic Party. My mother also, she took her Shahada in 1974. On the East Coast in Washington, D.C. She was, at that time, about 25 years old. I say this humbly, thinking of the ayah in the Quran where Allah mentions what's translated. Whoever Allah wishes to guide, what does He do? He expands His chest towards Islam. And so we see in the history of the African American, we see where Allah is at work. Because we see where He is gradually pulling them and rewarding their striving and effort, ultimately with Islam. They mentioned the Nation of Islam. I'll say a couple of things about the Nation of Islam. In our Islamic circles today, the Nation of Islam generally gets a lot of negative slack because they have false doctrine. Their aqidah is false. We know this. But to simply look at and judge them based off this is taking them out of their context. It's taking them entirely out of their context. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, I say honorable, not because I believe he was the messenger of God, but I think that because he was a black man in America in the 1930s who had a third grade education, who didn't have Google search or Chat GPT, he didn't have a sheikh, he didn't have any masjid he could go to. He was cut off from a lot of knowledge. So I give him some break on the fact that his knowledge wasn't accurate. And I look at the context that he was in. He lived in a society that was undeniably anti-black racist, that set up systems. He lived in a time that was called the Jim Crow era. We familiar with this terminology? If I say Jim Crow, you know what I'm talking about? I don't think they know what I'm talking about.
I think you need to spell it out for him.
So Jim Crow was slang term that was used in an era where blacks and whites were legally segregated from each other. So black people couldn't go to the same public institutions, public schools. They couldn't live in the same neighborhoods. And there was a lot of efforts to keep black people in an effort they called was separate but equal. But it was really separate and definitely not equal. And they got this term Jim Crow. It was really a character that was meant to insult black people as lazy, as uneducated, as dumb. And they used to do this thing where they would, white entertainers would paint their face, what they call it blackface, and then they would make jokes mocking black people. And that character they would call Jim Crow. In that era of segregation, they call it the Jim Crow era. So in the Jim Crow era, where certainly if you were black, just by being black in America, your identity was being attacked. You were not as intelligent. You were not as moral. You were not as capable. You were not as human. But your existence was tolerated and your opportunities were limited. It was in this context that the Nation of Islam was born. And it was in this context where the Honorable Elijah Muhammad wasn't focused on the Aqidah, he was focused on building up the esteem and the identity of these beat up individuals, these beat up black people. So he gave them identity. He said, they tell you that you're less than, I'm telling you you're better than. I'm telling you that they are the devil and that you are, astaghfirullah, you are divine, we'll say. And if you ever read the book or watched the movie Malcolm X, when he was learning and he was being taught, Elijah Muhammad was his teacher and mentor, and pulled him, reached him in jail and mentored him when he came out. And when he was learning that the white man was the devil, it wasn't hard to convince. There was a beautiful scene where he reflects on all of the white people and interactions in his life and the impact that they had on his life, and sending his mother to the crazy house. His father was assassinated by a hate group similar to the KKK, etc. And so his 8th grade teacher, can you imagine a teacher telling a child who was an A student, you are not, you have to choose a job that's reasonable for a Negro.
Yep.
You can't be a lawyer. Perhaps you can do something with your hands, shine some shoes. This was the role that he reflected on of white people in his life. So a group like the organization Nation of Islam, teaching black Americans at that time that the white person was the devil, it wasn't a stretch. It matched their experience with white America. And if we don't understand that, that tells me we're detached from that history. We're not looking at it in context. But the beauty of the Nation of Islam is, although it didn't teach Islam proper, what it did is it prepared millions of African Americans to eventually accept Islam proper. But first, it had to reintroduce them to their own humanity and tell them of their own worth, and teach them about being educated, teach them about having businesses, teach them about pulling their resources together and working together as a community, teaching them morals and ethics. And when we look at the story of Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali and how they came into the Nation of Islam, it's very obvious to see how it made them better people, and eventually it made it easy for them to accept Orthodox Sunni Islam. And that's the context we look at it. Now, my parents, they didn't come to the Nation of Islam when they accepted Orthodox Islam, but the energy at this time in the Civil Rights Movement in the 60s and right after in the 70s was such that a lot of African Americans were beginning to see the beauty and the truth of Islam. And it reminds me of Surah An-Nas, where Allah says, all of us know the surah, where Allah is telling us, إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفر إنه كان توابا. It points out when you see the help of Allah, it finally arrives. When the help of Allah finally arrives, how do we know Allah's help and victory is here? In other words, how do we know Allah's doing work? You can see people entering into the deed of Islam, afwaja. They're flocking to it in crowds. In 1975, when Elijah Muhammad passed away and his son, Imam Wafdin Muhammad, may Allah have mercy on him, took over the leadership of the Nation of Islam, he transitioned it immediately to Orthodox Islam. And by a miracle of Allah, the people stayed with him. They didn't turn their backs on him. And we see in history documented the largest conversion of United States citizens to Islam. And Imam Muhammad Abdullah was talking about the Africans who came over as slaves, and we anticipate or speculate that maybe 15, maybe a third, maybe a little bit more. Allah knows best. Here's another number I want to add to that to help us appreciate the miracle of Islam that took place in the United States of America. It's estimated that it was a total of 12 million Africans that were enslaved over in the transatlantic slave trade. Of those 12 million, guess how many of them came to the shores of America? It was less than 1 million. It was less even than 500,000. They anticipate or estimate it was something like 400,000. In the country of Brazil alone, they estimate it was some 5 million slaves were brought to Brazil. 12 times as many Africans were brought to Brazil as were brought to America. Why am I pointing this out? Because when we look at the history of Islam in America and we look at the history of Islam in Brazil, you don't have anything like the Nation of Islam. You don't have anything like Muhammad Ali. You don't have anyone like Malcolm X. You don't have anyone like Imam Warfin Muhammad. And we can go on and on and on. This tells us Allah is doing something special in America. And the evidence is you see the crowds of people that entered Islam in the 60s and the 70s by Allah's permission. We shouldn't overlook this. We should be thinking as Muslims, there's a miracle of Islam here. What is my contribution to it?
Right.
What role do I have to play? Dr. Sherman Jackson, he indicates something. He says, in the African American community, we have a communal conversion to Islam. A communal conversion, he says, is not that all of the African Americans became Muslims, only like 5%. But what he's saying is that the African American community embraced Islam because of that 5%. Because of the work of groups like the Nation of Islam. The name Muhammad became popular in the African American community, even in the whole world. At one point, imagine when Cassius Clay takes a Shahada, becomes Muhammad Ali, he's the heavyweight champion of the world, insisting that, no, you call me Muhammad Ali. So now people know the name Muhammad who didn't know it before. They're hearing the name Allah. They're hearing the word Islam and Muslim. They're becoming familiar with it. In the African American community, they see Muslims, African American Muslims, as part of the struggle for justice and for freedom. And so even though they don't become Muslims, they accept that the Muslims are part of their culture. And this is big. And this is an indicator to us of what can further happen in this country. As we identify with the struggles of the people that are here, and they become Muslim, and they begin to accept the Muslims as part of them. The pattern is already happening. And the connection and the affinity with the African American community is already there. I'll say a couple more things, and then we'll close this up for prayer.
While you're doing that, I want to draw something out that
Sure.
as I was listening to you. You talk about the numbers that came to the States versus Brazil and other areas, the huge disparity in numbers, the small number, 1/12 of those that reached Brazil, and how the experience and the dynamics and the evolution was different. And I was listening to you say that, I was reflecting on what Muhammad Abdullah was talking about the struggle. I would posit this, and I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on this. It's that very struggle that we faced here. The slavery in the US was very different than the slavery in Brazil. The circumstances in Brazil were very different than the circumstances they faced in the US. Could it be, thinking to the surah you were mentioning, etc., that struggle, that oppression that they faced was the catalyst? The same way we see, like during 9/11 and other things, we had mass numbers of conversions taking place in the midst of what seemed like oppression. Could it be that very oppression was the thing that sowed the seeds, prepared the soil for that growth to happen?
Oh, absolutely. And so Allah is the best of planners. He said, "Innahum yakiduna kaida wa akidu kaida." They're plotting, they're scheming, they have their plan, but I'm planning. And so we can take comfort as believers that Allah's plan is going to win out. But when we look at it, even I guess maybe from a more material perspective, there's unique conditions and factors in America of not just the people who were brought here, but American society, the experiences that they had here, and then what America becomes as a superpower. And so I think all of these are clues that Allah is using this American experience to show the world something about who He is in growing Islam here. And He started it with the African American community. And I'm going to go back here. There was an ayat that I skipped here. In Surah Al-Qasas, Allah gives us a reminder when He's talking about Pharaoh. He says, "We desire to show favor to those who are oppressed in the land and to make them leaders and inheritors." So Allah has a sunnah. He has a way of doing things that doesn't change, right? And so he gives us the story of Pharaoh and how he oppressed the children of Israel, and then how Allah favored the children of Israel to teach a lesson to Pharaoh. Well, I have some news for you all. We still have a Pharaoh today. And worse news, this Pharaoh has not drowned. This Pharaoh is not a person. It's not a human being. This is a Pharaoh that my parents dealt with, my grandparents dealt with, my great-grandparents dealt with. Never died, never went away, but has convinced people that it's okay. Now today we're seeing the reemergence of that same oppressive ideology, that pharaonic mindset that I'm greater, that I'm God, that I can do what I want, even if I kill children to secure my power. That same Pharaoh is showing his face today. As African Americans, we're not surprised. We're like, oh, you've been here all along. Some people are surprised, and their surprise surprises me. Like, are we not watching the same
stories?
Yeah, they say, can you see, look, federal agents stopping and arresting people just for how they look? I'm like, yeah.
Been there, done that.
This is America, right? Alhamdulillah. So yeah, I think there's something unique about the American experience that makes it possible.
You remind me of, I hear sometimes people describe the analogy of the sun rising in the west as that very thing that you're talking about.
I believe there was a stark difference between the slave trade in South America and the slave trade in North America. The English came to settle this land. It's the same thing that we see going on today. White nationalism, white superiority, Christian nationalism. There was a concerted effort to separate the identity of the enslaved people to make them Christian, right? In South America, it wasn't the same. They were there to take the land, and once the slaves revolted and they gained power, they kind of left and went back. But the English, they stayed here, they expanded out west, and they did it under the disguise of manifest destiny. They thought that God gave them the right. Kind of sounds like Israel right now, don't it? God gave us the right to move out west. They used the Bible, not only to enslave Africans through the curse of Ham, but also to expand out west. So a lot of that is the identity in there. And what African Americans and the Nation of Islam was trying to achieve is to reclaim our identity. Every African American who is Muslim here will tell you their family name before they became Muslim. Mine was Williams. Who was yours, Imam?
There's a few. Styles.
Styles, I'm Williams. Back before my father converted. When the Nation of Islam came, the first thing that they did was remove the slave masters' names. Because we didn't come from Africa with the name Styles and Williams. I'm looking at this brother right here. Are you African? Sorry to assume. Your name isn't Williams, is it? No. No African gonna be Williams, Michael Jordan, LeBron James. There's no Africans with those names. The first thing the Nation of Islam tried to do, besides Aqidah, the Aqidah was wrong, we understand that. They tried to reclaim their identity. And that was the difference of slavery in North America versus South America. It was an identity thing. To make this country a nation of white Christians. White superiority, Christian nationalism, and that's the same thing that's going on today. That's why it doesn't surprise us. They want us Muslims and Islam to continue to be seen as something foreign. And the more that they try to suppress Islam and oppress Muslims, the more we grow. فَزَادَهُمْ إِيمَانًا وَقَالُوا حَسْبُنَا اللَّهُ وَنِعْمَ الْوَكِيلُ. When the munafiqs came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, there's a big army gathering against you, be scared of them. It only increases us. The more you hate Muslims, the more you do in Gaza, the more Muslims. The more you do in America, Minnesota, you want to talk about Somali, more Muslims. And so there was that concerted effort here, which then resulted in, guess what? More Muslims. SubhanAllah.
I want to make sure we have time for questions. So I'll just say my final thought on this is that as Americans, or as Muslims rather, living in America, whether you are African American or not, you should know this history. This is your history. because this is the history of Islam in America. Just as we all believe in the miracle of Islam in Arabia in the 7th century, the same Lord who crafted that miracle is still alive, it still has power over all things, is still making Muslims. And we can look and see where he brought that to America. And he chose the African American experience to deliver Islam to this land. But he didn't stop it there, because through that struggle we saw in the slide presentation, it led to opening up the immigration doors, which allowed even more Muslims to come here. They weren't planning on more Muslims coming here when they opened up the door. They thought they were just getting engineers and doctors. They got more Muslims. Our Imam is reminding us, make sure you're coming over here as a Muslim to grow Islam, not just to make money as a doctor or engineer. And so there's a plan in place that Allah has made very clear, which is to grow Islam here. And I'm saying all of us need to be thinking about how are we contributing to this. And we're not contributing to it with full fidelity and sincerity if we are not intentionally working together in our communities. We can't work separate from each other. We can't think that someone's better than the other because of this or that. The ayat was already mentioned. Allah put us in different tribes and nations. We should be recognizing each other. Ah, you're Muslim. Oh, you're a human being. Oh, you're just like us. We have a common enemy. What are your solutions? What knowledge have you gained that can help us? We're in the same struggle together. And we need to realize that, because our enemies looks at us and identifies us quickly. Enemy, enemy. And we're looking at each other like, brother, well, what is your madhab? And, you know, how are you? Brother, we're on the same team. So I'm reminding us and encourage us, we must work together. We must be committed to put in the work to push Islam to the next level in this country. I want
to say one last point before we open up for questions on what Abdul Jami just said. We are in this country maybe 2%. The number of Muslims that come to the masjid on a regular basis, at least once a week, is under, I repeat, under 50%. 42% is what I've seen. I think that's still too high, but we'll take that number as fact for now. 42%, so more than half do not come here even weekly. So those that are even in the building are a minority amongst that minority. We can't do what Abdul Jami was just talking about. Brother, what's your method? What's your fiqh? What's your tariqah? What's this? What's that? That's helping the enemy defeat us. I'm not saying set aside the differences we have, but for the sake of the ummah's survival and growth, we need to set these things aside and unite upon the things we are in agreement on and serve the larger cause of Islam and this ummah in the United States. Then we can continue the miracle that Abdul Jami and Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah have both spoken about. So with that, I'd love to open it up for questions, ideally addressing the topic. But we'll take what we can, inshallah. Please, we want to make sure that people are engaged and understand the relevance of this topic. Please. Yeah, I think so. Take this off so we can pass this around.
Assalamu alaikum, jazakumullah khair. My question is, these brothers, mashallah, they did amazing job, like brother Worthin Muhammad, right? They did mass conversion, right? So how can, we as a Muslim, we can study their life, try to work, not only just African American community, with other communities. So I'd like to get you guys ideas on this.
Please.
So if I understand the question, you're asking how can we learn from the Imam Worthin Muhammad community on how to spread Islam? Is that? So I think I understand your question. Imam Worthin Muhammad, may Allah have mercy on him. There was a lot of things moving that put him in that position to do that. It's difficult to say just, talk how he talked, teach how he teach, to have the results that he had. And this is why I say it was a miracle of Allah. It was a miracle of Allah. But there are lessons that we can take from it. And what I will say is that as Muslims, if we understand our faith properly, we can see it through our culture. We don't have it confused with our culture. We can distinguish it from our culture. This is one advantage that the African Americans had, because we knew as African Americans that our culture is not Islam. And so when we want to know, well, what is Islam, we're not going to look at, well, what are they doing in Iraq? What are they doing in Egypt? What are they doing in Pakistan? We're looking at, well, what does it say in the Quran? What did the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ do? And then I think once we understand and we can clearly see Islam separate from our own culture, then we have to think here in America, what is the condition of the people? And how does Islam already have solutions that address the conditions of the people? What made Islam attractive, I believe, to the African Americans is that it was seen as solving a problem. It was helping enhance the life better. People weren't necessarily shopping for a religion, but they were looking for a better life. And understanding that this is not it. What I'm going through, this foot on my neck is not it. And so here, the challenge is for us as Muslims in America, who we claim we have the guidance from Allah. So, for example, America struggles with racism. Our deen, everyone will say, is against racism. But as individuals and as communities, are we ready to model to America how to live as a multicultural, multi-ethnic community and to do so in harmony and mutual respect? I don't think we've modeled that for them yet. And I think when we model that, then we can start to pull people in. This is a country that struggles with individualism. And our faith teaches us about being concerned with others and serving others. And you're not a real believer if you're hungry in your neighbors. We have in our deen the principles that address illnesses that are going on here. So we need to see what are the illnesses here and emphasize that in our practice of this deen to the American people. And they're coming for remedies. They're coming for healing.
Yes.
And that's what Islam has to offer. Inshallah, I hope that helps.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers. Jazakallah khair for your insight about the history of Islam in America. I have something that I also feel about the identity, which is very, very important. As we hear, there are so many people, Muslims, who change their identity, their names, and so on. Still, it's happening. But on the other hand, the way I see is that we should be also, besides Islamic knowledge, which is major for our children, but also we should be focusing on getting our children more highly educated from technology perspective, from other perspective, because through that, when they are working in more bigger companies and enterprise level companies, and they are not losing their Muslim identity, then they start seeing these Muslims who are working and who are very highly educated, they start respecting them because they are not hiding their identity. They are saying, I'm Muslim and I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm a architect, I'm in different bigger positions. And then I pray salat, I do fasting, I do these things. So they start taking that positively, that they are not just Muslim and not serving the country or not serving the community, but also, they are not losing their identity. They are proud of their identity. So that's how we earn the respect and dignity. That's one of the aspects that I see. I think we should promote in our community. Jazakallah khair.
I think the sacrifice and the struggle that I spoke about earlier, it goes both ways. So as he mentioned, Muhammad Ali, who insisted that people call him Muhammad. One time I was in a cab, I'm going to tell you a quick story. And I was in a cab with a driver named Sam. His name was Sam, right? So we get to talking, and I tell him, eventually he asked me my name. I said, Muhammad. He said, oh, you Muhammad? I'm Muslim too. My name is Sulaiman. So you have some people running from the identity the opposite way. While the pioneers of Islam in America, they were sacrificing the dunya to preserve their deen. A lot of people are giving up their deen to chase the dunya. The key is, how can we be balanced? Yes, we can be lawyers and doctors and scientists, but it can't cost us our religion. We can't sacrifice that. That's a non-negotiable. Doctor, that's negotiable. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. Both things are important. They don't have to be one or the other. But the one that has to remain is the Islam.
Right.
Yeah, that has to remain. And if Allah gives you doctor by being a Muslim, alhamdulillah. But if Allah says, you know what, it's going to be too difficult for you to reserve your Islam by practicing in this hospital, which is giving people medicines that make them sick because you work for a big pharmaceutical company, a Muslim can't do that. So you have to see which one is more important for you. It's not that one or the other. It's that you prioritize one and Allah gives you dunya. Or maybe He keeps it from you.
Right.
But if you prioritize dunya, Allah will keep the deen from you. So that's I think is the key there. Balance.
I'd like to add something to that real quickly. So one of the spaces I'm very active in is LinkedIn, and so I write a lot to professional audiences. And one of the things that has resonated most deeply with the audiences has been about showing up with your whole self in the workplace. Many people, and I'm sure many people in this room can identify with this, struggle with bringing their whole authentic self to the workplace. I did serve for a number of years in the corporate sector in management with Fortune 500 companies. And so you can do what you're talking about, but like Muhammad Abdullah was just talking about, there's a challenge sometimes about how much do you sacrifice to achieve those ends and those goals in the pursuit of those things where you start to jeopardize or harm your opportunity to live your full authentic self, to pray openly, to have people, like my managers got accustomed to the fact that we needed to pray, we were fasting, we needed to break fast. Even they would schedule meeting times around prayer times. They would keep a calendar of prayer times in their office so they knew what my expectations was about being able to pray, etc. And so if you're able to do that, then pursue those things, absolutely. But if you're having difficulty showing up, you either need to change your environment or change your location.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallahu khair, all of you, for spending the time here and appreciate the discussion. I'm going to ask you a question a little differently. Now, we talked about the positives of the Muslims in America. The other side is that what you see in the secular world and in the education system, what we witnessed, the goal is to take the God from your life. The first step is take the Allah. So if you can, some way, you can, these young minds, they are not grown-ups, it's kind of construct, unseen, So first of all, if you can take the God from your life, then everything is become very easy. Then the family bond, then the parents. A lot of things, what we do, we respect each other. We love our parents. We do a lot of charity because of Allah. So if you can take Allah away from your life, then the rest of the job becomes easier. So I know a lot of brothers taking shahada, we give hug and we give takbir and all those things. But you see, those who came here, we practicing the deen, we're following. But our children, significant percentage of the children, maybe they are academically very achieving. They are becoming lawyer, doctors, or business entrepreneur, but they are losing their faith. They're shy to keep their name. Like Muhammad, they don't call Muhammad, it's called Mo. If they have Ashraful, they call Ash, so they feel shy about. So what is your advice? Because you are all born here, you have gone through the systems, you are practicing different religions, people are embracing Islam. So if you can help us understanding.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Before I answer that, I'm curious, are the sisters able to ask questions? Because I know we had a microphone up there earlier for the
Did early.
shahada.
I have a feeling
These are
that
the
one
mics?
might be the one that we had.
Say again? That was the microphone?
Yeah, I had a feeling.
You want me?
Brotherhood, how did you get that
Sign language,
microphone,
you guys
brother?
to sign your question.
This guy's
I love the
always-
mic.
Always causing problems. That was the last question, by the way. I'm not gonna. Okay, so
Yeah, we can repeat the questions from down here. So we'll give them an opportunity to chime in.
I will say this, that Islam in America, I said this earlier today, it's at a infantile stage. And this is not any sort of an insult. Whether you immigrated here, you come from a family or a culture that's been Muslim for centuries or 1,000 years or more, or you're like myself, the children of converts, or even a convert yourself, Islam is at an infantile state here. And this should make us think about the early days in Mecca and what we need to prioritize. That's why when we're having fiqh debates, it tells me you don't understand the context that you're in. You're having Medina arguments, and we're like in Mecca, surrounded by mushriks.
Yeah.
You know, people forget the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He made salat at the Kaaba when there were 360 idols there. He wasn't like, oh, astaghfirullah, there's idols, I can't pray here, you know. He was like, well, this is the context. I'm going to pray here at the house of Allah. And there were a lot of things in the deen that were not revealed to him in those early ages by the wisdom of Allah. It was revealed later. The people weren't ready for it. You're changing culture, it takes time. And so why I say we're at an infantile state is because we're in the process of establishing Islam anew in a new environment. So we don't have the luxury of just doing what our parents did, copy paste. Because we're facing challenges our parents didn't face. We're facing realities in a context that was unfamiliar with them. I can't take a brilliant scholar from 700 years ago and copy his work word for word. His brilliance was born out of a particular context. He was solving problems that were in front of his eyes. He wasn't solving the problems that are in front of my eyes. So I have to learn from him in a different way. Use some critical thinking. And I think this is part of our challenge, whether we're new to this deen or we had it for generations, is that we haven't appreciated the fact that we need to critically think in our education. We need to know what to prioritize. Imam Saeed said earlier, he used the phrase, kind of some things get set to the side. Not that it's not important, but it's not right now.
Yeah.
That's not the first thing. You mentioned having a relationship with Allah. Well, isn't this what the 13 years in Mecca was establishing before all of the ahkam came down? People were in a society where they didn't know Allah, even though they knew of Allah. If you ask them who created the heavens and earth, who are they going to say? Allah. But why are they worshiping idols? They don't really know Allah then. That idol can't help you. Whatever you're asking it, that's what Allah can give you. So now fast forward here. Do we know Allah as Muslims? Or are we just performing rituals, going through motions, doing what our parents taught us? But do we really believe? Our actions will bear it out, what we really believe, who we're afraid of, what's important to us, how we treat people. So I think we have a crisis of Iman. We don't know really who is our Lord yet. The beauty of the convert is that they have given and sacrificed so much because they were looking for that identity of who am I? And I learned it from learning who is Allah. And so when you have that level of faith and you're willing to sacrifice your culture, you're willing to sacrifice your family, you're willing to sacrifice being popular because you believe you're satisfying your Lord, like this is the tradition we need to follow. This is the tradition we need to follow. And so I think in our educational institutions, we need to focus on that, building Iman, building relationships with Allah, looking at how it rolled out in those early Meccan years, looking at those surahs that were revealed first, that were free of a lot of ahkam, but tell us about who is Allah and why we should love Him, why we should want to serve Him. Inshallah, I hope that helps.
I want to add just one thing about that, because really quick. I think that in America, we've prioritized a theoretical understanding of Islam and not a practical one. Islam has always been something that provided solutions. It was practical. It was social justice. Our kids, they memorize the entire Quran. But is it here? In the application, how do we apply the Quran? Are we going and feeding the homeless? Allah says in Surah Al-Ma'un, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُ الْيَتِيمِ وَلَا يَحُدُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. Woe to the ones who pray, but they walk past a homeless person. And they don't encourage people to give to the orphan. And so Islam has to be practical, and we have to prioritize in our kids' life the practical application of the Quran. Not just study the Quran, yeah, you got it, hafiz, mashallah, like a parrot. A parrot could become a hafiz. And nowadays, with all of the technology, anything, you can get information at the flick of a light. We have to prioritize social justice and practical application. Go in the street, go down to Masjid al-Islam on Saturdays and feed the homeless. Come to the Day of Dignity and see what's going on. Go to the city council meetings, see what's the issue in the society. What about the streets? What about the potholes? What about the homeowners association? That's Islam too. That's how you preserve the Islam. Make it a practical thing and not a theoretical achievement. Jazakallah khair. Sisters, any questions from sisters?
Heard the microphone. I fear we already lost you guys, but please, if you got any questions at all,
Sorry.
feel free to chime in.
We're going to try to get a sister in, Brother Hood. We're going to get you. If there's no sisters, then we'll get Brother Hood and come back to the sisters if there any, before we close out.
Please.
Uh-huh. 23%. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. 13 in 2024. You said there was okay. So he's speaking about the Pew Research study. 2017 it was 23%. You're saying in 2024 it came down to 13%. Okay, I was unaware of that. Go ahead. That's a question for Brother Saeed, since he's the research specialist. What I'll say, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, so let me speak to a few of those different things. Inshallah, it looks like we, okay. So firstly, the number about 23% of people born into Muslim families that leave Islam, that number was offset by the number of converts in the community, which was around the same number, 23%. Now, you mentioned the depressing part about that. It's a net zero. The upside of that is that every other faith group was a negative in that regard. As far as reliable numbers, yes, Pew Research may not always be the most reliable numbers, but that's going to be true with any statistical analysis because it's only as good as the sample. What I can say is, and I believe the brothers might have been getting ready to say the same thing, there is at least one organization in the Muslim community that is doing similar work, ISPU, that does similar work, and actually Dalia Magahid, who is the head of that organization, and John Esposito worked together on a project prior to that with Pew Research that was published as a book called What a Billion Muslims Really Think. It was a deep statistical analysis of worldwide Muslim attitudes and demographics around many different issues. So again, the numbers are what they are in terms of the sample size and how reliable it is, but usually the reports will tell you, like, margin of error and things like that, et cetera, within that basis of reliability. But so ISPU, for me, in the work that I do, like the 42% number I quoted earlier, that's from ISPU's research. So that's Muslim-led research showing 42% attend the masjid on a weekly basis. And the numbers go down from there for more frequently, et cetera. So there are different mechanisms out there to look for that information, but all of that information is only going to be as reliable as the sample size that they're able to draw from. Anecdotally, from my own experience with converts, it's a difficult thing to track because if we're being honest with ourselves, most of the time we lose track of most of our converts. Now, the fact that maybe, say, somebody that took Shahada here, whether it's Hugo or Allison, and maybe we don't see them again for a long time, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not still active or participating in another community, just that we aren't seeing them. So it becomes challenging to be able to establish solid numbers, like even some of the brothers here I know aren't regulars here necessarily, but I know they're active elsewhere.
I just want to add to that before we go to the sisters that the 23%, the way I understood it, was not necessarily apostate, which we know in Islam is obviously a grave sin, punishable by death according to Sharia, but no longer associate or practice. And from a practical standpoint, from my experience, that's at least close to what I've experienced. Now, whether that's factually correct, Allah knows best. But I say it just to shock. I think it should shock us to understand how difficult it is to practice Islam in this country. For some people anyway, because of the pull of secularism and capitalism.
I would say, those kind of numbers can seem depressing. I think that's part of the paradigm shift we have to go through. We have to realize that those numbers, however depressing they might seem, are really opportunities for us to refocus, going back to what Muhammad Abdul-Jami was talking about, dealing with our realities. We oftentimes in the church, you have this phrase, preaching to the choir. Most of what we say is always in this space. These are the people that are already in the masjid. These aren't arguably the people that need that message. The people that need this message aren't here. So the question becomes, from an outreach standpoint, how do you get that message to the people that need it most? So rather than being depressed by it, I see it as an opportunity to go, okay, now this is where my focus needs to be, and helping us refocus our efforts to where they're needed most.
Let's go to the sisters because they've been waiting.
Assalamu alaikum. I just wanted to mention that there's actually an active effort right now to block some of this history from being taught in the public schools. So I did want to invite everybody to be part of the effort. If you don't know about the social studies revision that's going on right now, please become aware of that. About 8 of us testified at the State Board of Education last week to try to bring this to their attention. They pretty much ignored us, but we did get some media attention. Also, I wanted to ask about, you started out talking about Columbus and the fact that Estevanico was on the ship with him, and maybe just a little bit more about that global context, like why was he with them? What was going on in the world at that time? Why did Columbus have Arabic speakers with him? So I think there's a lot to say about that too in terms of Islam's role or the Islamic world's role.
Absolutely. I'll go ahead in that context, and Abdullah Hakim Quick does a good job of reporting this in his books. There were interpreters on board Columbus's ships to translate Arabic when they arrived in the Central American diaspora. He had Muslim guides and navigators and things like that, etc. Because of, if you understand the history of Spain and Andalusia, and what was happening around that time of 1492. Muslims existed in large numbers in southern Spain, but they were being forced to hide their identity, going back to what we were talking about, and pretend at least to be Christian or to not openly practice their faith, etc. But so you definitely had existing Muslims on board the ship. You talk about Azemmouri and others that were part of these expeditions that came afterwards, etc. So that was very prominent. And even in the annals of Columbus, when you look at his annals, Abdul Hakim Quick mentions this, that they write about mosquitoes in the hills as they're arriving in Central America. What that means is they're seeing mosques in the hills as they're arriving in Central America. So what does that tell you? That tells you Muslims were already present in Central America as Columbus was arriving in the beginning of the 16th century. So there's a lot, as you said, to be said about that history, about what was happening and what was transpiring in those areas, etc. And so a lot of people only think about American history in the context of the Northern Europeans, England and the Dutch and things like that. But Spain had a history in the Americas that arguably predated a lot of that stuff and was responsible for a lot of the Muslim presence in the Americas long before the English and the others were bringing slaves to these borders as well. The Spanish and the Portuguese had a much greater influence and a much earlier presence in that. If you look into the history of Florida and some of the Muslims that landed in Florida with some of those ventures as well, and escaped into the hills and became members of the Native American tribes. There's a story that you can find, it's a long time ago in The Message, ISNA's flagship magazine, about the history of Native American Muslims in the United States, so much so that there are treaties with Native American tribes in the northeast, that the signatories from the tribes of these treaties have Muslim Arabic names. Native American chiefs of tribes with Muslim Arabic names that are signing these treaties. That tells you something about the history, that going back to the idea of rewriting American history, denying the 500-year established history of Muslims in Texas, let alone the states, that people are ignoring or being wiped out of the books. And CARE is well aware of this and is working on this at a state level, by the way.
Any other brothers? Well, Brother Hood, we've been waiting for a while.
Islam.
Especially when you think of folks in this larger DFW community, especially living in the north suburbs, how can we also kind of support the African American Muslim community? What are some kind of practical things?
It's all you.
How can brothers living in the greater DFW area support the African American communities, was his question. Imam Abdul Jami.
So I would just kind of rephrase the question. I don't want to put it in a context of, I don't want to frame it in a context of the African American Muslims are in need of your support. Instead, I would say something similar to what Allah says. He has made us into different tribes and nations so that we can get to know each other. So we need to get to know each other. And this lays the groundwork for us to then do work with each other, which creates a groundwork for us to mutually benefit from each other's expertise, right? Because there's things that the African American experience has taught us that would be beneficial to all of us Muslims. Some things that we take for granted because, my mom told me this, my dad told me this, because they've been here, that we assume that everybody knows. And y'all don't know about Emmett Till? Y'all don't know about Roots?
Right.
That book, Roots, is one of the main reasons my mother took her Shahada. She read that book and it put Islam on the radar for her and wanted her to know more about it. And to me, this is basic knowledge. But I know not everyone has a mother who... So we have to get to know each other. That's what I would say. And how do we get to know each other? We support each other's activities and functions. So that means knowing where Masjid al-Islam is. That means if there's an iftar. That means if there is a feeding operation. That means finding ways to get down to that community, pray with the brothers and sisters there, socialize with the brothers and sisters there. We have to form genuine, meaningful relationships with each other that I think sets the groundwork for us to then do work with each other. And so that's how I would frame it. We're not utilizing each other properly because we have our own lives and our own issues and our priorities and we're busy. And so it's my job to put on the radar that, hey, we need each other. Not like the African Americans need you, but we mutually need each other, and our inability to link up together is causing all of us to suffer. And if it's not obvious to us now how we're not suffering, I don't know when it'll be obvious to us.
I want to tease out something that Muhammad Abdul Jami was just talking about when he talks about this importance of getting to know one another. And ironically, I mentioned this in the khutbah I gave earlier today. Not here. Allah chose a particular word when he said this. He said, لِتَعَارَفُوا. He didn't say لِتَعَلَّمُوا. He said لِتَعَارَفُوا. There's a difference when you say ilm, academic knowledge, versus ma'ruf, arif. Arif is experiential knowledge. So to put it in the parlance of the West, what it means is we need to break bread together. We need to sit down together, and we need to spend time together to know each other like we know our families, like we know our neighbors, like we know our friends. That's how we need to know one another. It's not this, oh yeah, I know that there's the African American community over there. I know there's the Sudani community there. I know there's the Bengali community here. This Sudani, this, that, the other thing, etc. No, we're not talking about stuff you can find on Google or in an encyclopedia. I know that's dating me, but we need to actually get together, spend time together. So when there are those opportunities to blend our cultures together, our societies and our communities together, like the Eid. I was just thinking about this, that community Eid back in '77, where IANT and Mashallah Islam came together. Where are those opportunities now? Why aren't we making an effort to bring the community together so that all of the various pockets that we have can get to know one another, lita'arafu, as we were just talking about?
Let's get that brother's question.
This is my son-in-law, actually.
Just kind of want to see what you guys reflect on that, see like in today's day. So, you know how you guys are alluding to the fact that there's like an amnesia of like the American conscious about Muslim history in America, right? And part of why that I think that is because what you said, well, 1,000 slaves came to America, right? 30% of the people take are Muslims, right? So that's like what 120,000 Muslims in America in 79. It's not an insignificant amount of Muslims here, right? And then you also allude to the fact that I think there's a precursor nation of Islam, there's a precursor to a lot of the African Americans, the immigrants. There's a kind of a gap, right? And so why was there that gap, right? And with people, it would occur to me that Islam was kind of decimated in that slave population, right? You did say that Thomas Jefferson, you know, he, in the Constitution that was ratified in 1787, put freedom of religion, but it would occur to me that those slaves didn't really get a lot of that freedom of religion. So is that something that you worry about could happen in today's day and age? I mean, one of the things that comes to the back of my head is that, I'm paraphrasing it, but the nations coming to divide us, and then why are they dividing us so much?